Good evening. I am Uyaniek and coming to you live from Ibiakuran. Today on Spotlight Africa, Ghana's president says it's time for Africa to get reparations. Zwahiri killing brings closure to Kenyan victims. Ex-Liberian vice president picked as presidential challenger. Sudan reports first monkeypox case. Plus, baby and father confirmed as Ghana's first Marburg deaths. All of the stories come just ahead on Spotlight Africa. Do stay with us. We begin today's Spotlight Africa with a report that Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo has said that the payment of reparations to Africans for the damage caused by the slave trade centuries ago is long overdue. In a series of tweets, he reiterated a speech he made at a summit on reparation and racial healing that laid out the case for money to be paid to the continent. Ghanaian leader said the slave trade's effects were devastating to the continent and that diaspora and the entire slavery period stifled Africa's economic, cultural, and psychological progress. According to the UN, the transatlantic slave trade, which affected millions of Africans, was the largest forced migration in history and one of the most inhumane. The exodus of Africans was spread to many areas of the world over a 400-year period. Meanwhile, the Ghanaian leader said the subject of reparations become a debate only when it comes to Africa and Africans, noting that the so-called owners of enslaved Africans had received reparations.
Quote, indentured servant. Again, should the African peoples be described as, quote, indentured servants or, quote, apprentices for life? Ladies and gentlemen, it began with some 20 slaves from West Africa being forcibly sent to the Commonwealth of Virginia in what was to become the United States of America. It was the first of 36,000 voyages to and from the continent, which resulted in 20 million African slaves from West Africa being forcibly sent to the Commonwealth of Virginia in what was to become the United States of America. It was the first of 36,000 voyages to and from the continent, which resulted in 20 million Africans from Central and West. Never again
died of Marburg in Ghana, as health authorities clarify the figures of those killed by the virus that is from the same family as Ebola. This brings to 2 the total number of people who have died in Ghana in the current outbreak. The 14-month-old father was the first person to have died in the country. Meanwhile, the baby's mother has tested positive for the virus, but is alive and well. According to the government, who says she's receiving care in an isolation center to prevent further spread of the illness. Another patient thought to have died of Marburg was later confirmed negative, after post-mortem tests revealed that the 51-year-old man did not in fact have the disease. The Marburg virus is highly infectious and similar to Ebola, causing fever, muscle pains, diarrhea, vomiting, and in some cases death through extreme blood loss. To Sudan now, where the deputy head of Sudan's ruling council, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, has acknowledged that last year's military coup and the ousting of the country's civilian prime minister has failed to bring about necessary change. Speaking to newsmen, the general, also known as Hemeti, said placing Abdallah Hamdok under house arrest has only made the situation worse. He was speaking after months of demonstrations in Khartoum and other cities by protesters, calling on the military to restore a civilian government. The general said they would support anyone willing to come forward to lead the country. It could be recalled that in July, the military leader, General Abdel Fattah, said he too was ready to step aside if rival factions can agree on a civilian government, but protesters described his offer as a ruse. Away from that, the British government has suspended its decision to stop providing aid to state hospitals in South Sudan. Cuts were due to come into effect on Monday, but the funding has been extended for 2 months. The UK helps pay for staff salaries, medical supplies and services such as antenatal care. Meanwhile, South Sudan's health minister has warned that her country does not have enough money to take over the responsibilities. Meanwhile, Sudan has dictated its first monkeypox case today after the World Health Organization last month declared the disease a public health emergency of international concern. The health ministry announced registering the first confirmed case of monkeypox in a 16-year-old student in the West Darfur state in Sudan. According to Director of Epidemic Control, Mantassa Othman, there had been around 38 other suspected cases, but that all had tested negative for the virus. He added that an investigation was underway by the federal and state health ministries to determine the source of the infection. Elsewhere, 2 people were reportedly killed in alleged police shootings during protests over the cost of electricity in a South African township today. Reports say residents angry at the high cost of basic services barricaded roads with burning tires and set ablaze a municipal building in Temisha Township, northeast of the financial hub Johannesburg. According to local municipal police spokeswoman Kelly Bogley Thipa, there were 2 fatal injuries linked to the protest action that occurred during the early hours of today. In the meantime, more than 80 suspects have appeared in a South African court following the gang rape of 8 women who were attacked while filming a music video last Thursday. The victims described how they were accosted by gun-wielding men wearing balaclava masks and blankets who took turns raping them before robbing them of their belongings. All the suspects are undocumented immigrants and have been charged with contravening the country's immigration laws. DNA tests will determine if any of them will face rape charges. The vicious attack on the women near a disused mine in Corndorsup has sent shockwaves across South Africa. Meanwhile, President Cyril Ramaphosa called it the ugly and dark side of society and said the magnitude of the problem meant it would no longer be possible to avoid responsibility of reporting sexual offenses. South Africa's rape conviction rate is low, and civil society groups and opposition political parties have accused the country's justice system of failing victims. The suspects who were arrested and appeared in court belong to a gang of illegal miners, but they have not been officially charged for raping the women aged between 19 and 35. Away from that, Amnesty International has called for calm following violent protests which left 4 people dead in Tembisa, a South African township east of Johannesburg. Thousands of residents took to the streets on Monday protesting over the lack of basic services and high electricity tariffs. They blocked off several roads with burning tires, bricks and rubble. A police station was also set ablaze. It is alleged that the protesters who died were caught in crossfire between police and demonstrators. Meanwhile, Amnesty International has said swift action against those responsible for the deaths of the protesters must be taken. The narrative and the defeat of Ayman al-Zawahiri, an Egyptian doctor who was imprisoned in the 1980s for involvement in radical Islam. He left Egypt after his release and eventually settled in Afghanistan, where he joined forces with Osama bin Laden. Zawahiri was considered to be the ideological brains of Al-Qaeda. He was indicted in the U.S. for his role in the August 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, which killed 224 people and wounded thousands of others. He's believed to have plotted the attack in 2000 on the USS Cole, which killed 17 US sailors. Zawahiri and bin Laden jointly masterminded the attack of the 11th September 2001. Zawahiri became Al-Qaeda's leader after the killing of bin Laden by US forces in Pakistan a decade later. In a recent development, the killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri has brought a sense of closure to Kenyan victims injured in Al-Qaeda bombings of the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi 24 years ago. The twin attacks on the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania was one of Al-Qaeda's earliest attacks and caused over 200 deaths on the same day. The spokesman of Kenya's Victims Association, Douglas Sidialo, termed al-Zawahiri's killing an act of God. To Kenya now, where government will not be shutting down Facebook despite threats by the National Cohesion Agency to suspend it. The National Integration and Cohesion Commission, NCIC, last week said it had written to Meta, the company that owns Facebook, demanding a response to allegations of weak controls in moderating content on its platform ahead of next month's elections. It threatened to suspend the company's operation if it did not comply within 7 days with the requirements to control the spread of hate speech in the country. But the ICT minister questioned the legal framework the NCIC was using to recommend Facebook's suspension. Meanwhile, the Interior Minister Fred Matiang'i separately said the Kenyan government did not plan to clamp down on social media and distance itself from the statement by the NCIC. Meanwhile, Kenya's Education Minister has announced the abrupt closure of all schools starting today ahead of the country's general elections next week. Schools were initially scheduled to go for half-term break this Friday, but Professor George Magoha has ordered the closure a week early and classes to begin again on the 11th of August. The announcement caught many schools and parents by surprise, as some learners were already sitting midterm exams. Reports say many public schools are used as polling stations during elections in Kenya. Meanwhile, the current educational calendar has been hugely affected by the pandemic that led to schools closing for more than a year. Away from that, the number of people killed in flash floods in the eastern Ugandan city of Mbale has jumped to 22, including a group of partygoers who became trapped in a minibus. Reports say 2 rivers burst their banks after city was battered by heavy rainfall, leading to mudslides that inflicted widespread damage and left hundreds of residents homeless. Meanwhile, a combined force of police, the army and the Red Cross were continuing to search for the missing in the muddy flood waters that have swallowed up homes, bridges, shops and roads. Kenya plans nationwide electric car charging station. This is our story on Africa on the Rise. We'll take a break, and when we return, the rest of our stories continue. Thanks for staying tuned. The Democratic Republic of Congo is expected to hold talks with the UN mission in the country, MONUSCO, on the withdrawal of peacekeepers that will meet the demand of the people. The announcement came after President Felix Tshisekedi chaired a meeting with the president of the two chambers of parliament, the Prime Minister and officials from the eastern North Kivu province. Recall that deadly protests demanding MONUSCO's expulsion erupted in North Kivu's capital, Goma, on the 25th of July and have since spread. Meanwhile, activists accuse the UN mission of failing to stop decades-long rebellion in the east. On today's Africa on the Rise, Kenya's power utility firm Kenya Power has launched plans to build infrastructure that will enable the charging of electricity vehicles countrywide. A 6-month trial phase is expected to start in September in the capital, Nairobi, before going to other major towns across the country in 2 years' time. The adoption of electric vehicles in Kenya has been low, partly because of a lack of adequate charging stations for individuals and businesses. According to the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, only 350 out of an estimated 2.2 million registered vehicles in the country are electric. Meanwhile, the government hopes to increase the share of electric cars to reach 5% of all vehicle imports by 2025. For Spotlight personality, Toby Amusan Oluwa Toby Loba Ayomide Toby Amusan is a Nigerian track and field athlete who specializes in the 100 meters hurdle and also competes as a sprinter. Born on the 23rd of April 1997 and hails from Ijebu-Ode, Ogun State. In recent days, Toby Amusan has been all over the news for her sterling performance at the just concluded 2022 World Athletics Championships in Oregon, USA, by not only winning the 100 meters hurdles event, but also creating a world record with a time of 12 minutes 12 seconds in the semi-finals. She further blasted that record 2 hours later in what is referred to as a wind-aided time of 12.6 seconds. It must not go untold that her journey to stardom in representing Nigeria in the world of sport has not the least bit been seamless. In 2015, although Amusan qualified as a junior athlete and was billed for the athletics championships, she did not travel as a result of a delayed issuance of her visa, missed out on what could have been her introduction into international athletics. A few years down the line, the same championship, the same venue in Oregon, where she missed an introduction for her international athletic career in the junior category, became the same place where she conquered the world in the senior category. She broke an African and world record by completing the 100 meters race in 12.12 seconds and upbeating it by another 12.06 wind-aided seconds, and creating a new premise in the world of sports, raising the Nigerian flag high. Toby Amusan is a story of resilience, perseverance, and the audacity of faith. And that's all we do have for you at this time. Do ensure to follow us on social media, all of which you can find on our website, spectrumtv.ng. You have been watching Spotlight Africa. I am Uyai Anyeken. Thanks for watching and do enjoy the rest of your evening.
Spectrum TV, broadening your horizon.
According to reports, over 18,000 tons of waste is being generated within Uyo capital city per day. Usually, this waste gets dumped at Uyo Village Road, which links the government house to Ikpa Road,